My name is David Thompson. I've lived in the same quaint town of Oakwood for most of my life. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where neighbors wave as they pass by, and the local diner serves the best apple pie you've ever tasted. Nestled amidst rolling hills and lush forests, Oakwood is a picture-perfect setting for a peaceful life. At least that's what I thought. I met my wife, Emily, during a summer fair here nearly 10 years ago. She was vibrant and full of life, her laughter infectious as she worked the lemonade stand for a local charity. I was smitten from the moment I saw her. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the town's historic chapel, surrounded by friends and family. We moved into a charming 2-story house on Maple Street. The house, with its white picket fence and blooming garden, was our dream home. Inside, it was cozy and filled with love. Emily loved to decorate, and each room bore her personal touch. We didn't have children, but we had each other, and that was enough. I worked as a manager at a local hardware store, a stable job that provided for us, while Emily worked part-time at the town's library. Our life together was, for the most part, idyllic. We enjoyed quiet evenings together, often sitting on our porch swing, watching the sun set over the hills. Weekends were spent hiking the nearby trails or visiting the farmer's market. We had our routines, our little rituals, and I thought we were happy. But looking back, I realize how naive I was. Oakwood is a small town, but even in small towns, secrets can fester beneath the surface. My marriage, which I believed to be rock solid, was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. This is the story of how I discovered the truth about Emily, the betrayal that shattered my world, and the journey that followed as I tried to piece my life back together. It started with small things, the kind of changes that are easy to overlook if you're not paying close attention. Emily had always been warm and affectionate, but lately, there was a distance between us that I couldn't quite explain. She seemed distracted, her mind always elsewhere, even when we were together. She started spending more time on her phone, laughing at messages and quickly closing apps whenever I walked into the room. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that it was just a phase, that everyone gets busy and preoccupied at times. But then there were the late nights. Emily had always been home by 6, but suddenly she had meetings and errands that kept her out until well past dark. When I asked about it, she was evasive, her explanations vague and unconvincing. One night, she said she was going out to meet a friend from work. She dressed up more than usual, applying makeup with a care she hadn't shown in months. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach as she left. I wanted to trust her, but something felt off. As the weeks went by, the signs became harder to ignore. She was always on edge, snapping at me over trivial matters. Our once active sex life dwindled to nothing, and any attempt to initiate intimacy was met with excuses or outright rejection. I found myself questioning everything, second-guessing every interaction, every word. I confided in my best friend Mike, who had been my confidant since childhood. "Something's not right," I told him one evening over a beer at our favorite bar. "Emily's been acting strange, and I can't shake the feeling that there's more going on than she's letting on." Mike listened, his brow furrowed in concern. "Have you talked to her about it?" he asked. "I've tried," I said, shaking my head. "But she just gets defensive or changes the subject." Mike leaned back, sipping his beer thoughtfully. "Maybe it's nothing, but if you're really worried, you need to find out what's going on. Trust your gut, Dave." His words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as I went about my days, the unease growing with each passing moment. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. My suspicions continued to gnaw at me, eating away at the fabric of trust I once had in Emily. One evening, I decided to take action. I installed a small tracking device in her car. It felt wrong, like a breach of her privacy, but I needed to know the truth. If she was faithful, I'd feel terrible for doubting her, but if she wasn't, I had to prepare myself for that possibility. A few nights later, Emily told me she was going out to meet a friend. I watched her get ready, my stomach churning with a mix of anxiety and dread. She kissed me on the cheek and left. As soon as the door closed, I grabbed my phone and opened the tracking app. The little dot representing her car moved steadily through town, heading away from the area where her supposed friend lived. I got into my own car and followed the signal. It led me to the outskirts of town, to a secluded parking lot near an old abandoned warehouse. My heart pounded in my chest as I pulled up and parked a safe distance away, ensuring I wouldn't be seen. I watched as Emily's car came into view, parking next to another vehicle I didn't recognize. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She stepped out of her car, and a man emerged from the other vehicle. They embraced, their bodies pressed tightly together. My world shattered in that moment, the pain of betrayal cutting deeper than I ever thought possible. I wanted to confront them right then and there, to scream and demand answers. But instead, I forced myself to stay calm, to watch and gather evidence. They got back into his car, and I saw them laughing, their faces lit up with a happiness that had been missing from our life. They kissed, deeply and passionately, and I felt my blood boil. This was more than just a casual fling. It was a full-blown affair. I took out my phone and started recording, capturing the undeniable proof of her infidelity. After what felt like an eternity, they started to undress each other, their movements hurried and desperate. I turned away, unable to watch anymore. I sat in my car, shaking with anger and hurt. When I looked back, I saw them moving together in the car, the windows fogging up from their activity. It was clear what was happening, and it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I waited until they finished, watching as they redressed and shared another long kiss before Emily got back into her car. She didn't see me as she drove away, her face flushed and eyes bright. I waited a few minutes before following her at a distance, making sure she returned home safely. I needed to confront her, but I wanted to do it in a controlled manner, with all the evidence laid out in front of her. When I got home, Emily was already in bed pretending to be asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom watching her, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak. How could she do this to us? To me? The betrayal felt like a physical wound, one that would never fully heal. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. But inside, I was a tempest of emotions, barely holding it together. I spent the day gathering all the evidence I had collected, organizing it into a file. I printed out the photos, saved the video recordings, and documented everything meticulously. This wasn't just about confronting Emily. It was about preparing for the battle that lay ahead. As I sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the pile of evidence, I knew there was no turning back. The confrontation was inevitable, and it would be brutal. Emily's lies and deceit had destroyed our marriage, and it was time for her to face the consequences. I spent the night preparing myself mentally for the confrontation. Every detail of Emily's betrayal was laid out in front of me, the evidence irrefutable. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. Today was the day I would confront her, and there was no turning back. I waited until the evening when Emily returned from work. As soon as she walked through the door, I could see the surprise on her face when she found me sitting in the living room, surrounded by the printed photos and recordings. Her eyes widened, and she froze in place. "David, what's all this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Sit down, Emily," I said, my voice cold and steady. "We need to talk." She hesitated for a moment before slowly lowering herself onto the couch. I could see the panic beginning to set in as she glanced at the evidence around her. "I know about the affair," I said bluntly. "I know everything. The messages, the meetings, the nights you spent with him." Her face turned pale, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Don't bother trying to deny it," I continued, my anger barely contained. "I have all the proof I need right here." "David, I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Explain?" I scoffed. "Explain how you could lie to me, cheat on me, betray everything we had? Go ahead, Emily. I'm listening." She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." "Never meant to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you think that makes it any better? Do you think that justifies what you did?" "It was a mistake," she pleaded. "I was feeling lonely, and he was there for me. But it didn't mean anything, David. It was just sex." "Just sex!" I exploded. "You think that makes it okay? You think that makes it hurt any less?" She started to cry, her sobs filling the room. "I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up, but please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Counseling? I shook my head in disbelief. How do you expect me to trust you again? How do you expect me to forget what you did? Please, she begged, reaching out to touch my hand. Please give me another chance. I love you, David. I love you so much. I pulled my hand away, unable to bear her touch. You should have thought about that before you decided to throw away our marriage. Her tears fell harder, but I felt no sympathy. The pain she had caused me was too deep, too raw. I want you out of the house, I said finally. Pack your things and leave. David, no, she cried. Please don't do this. We can work through this. We can be happy again. It's too late for that, I said, my voice breaking. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. She looked at me, desperation in her eyes, but I stood firm. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. I'll give you until the end of the week to move out, I said. After that, I don't want to see you here again. She nodded, defeated, and slowly stood up. I'm sorry, David. She whispered one last time before turning and walking up the stairs to pack her things. I watched her go, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, was now just a painful memory. The confrontation was over, but the battle for my future was just beginning. In the days that followed, my anger only grew. Emily had moved out, but the sight of her empty side of the closet and her absence at the dinner table were constant reminders of her betrayal. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and my mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. She had destroyed our marriage, and I was determined to make her pay. I started by digging deeper into her affair with the man I had seen her with. His name was Brian, and from what I gathered, he was a colleague at the library where Emily worked part-time. The more I learned about him, the more disgusted I became. He was married with children, yet he had no qualms about pursuing an affair with my wife. I felt an overwhelming urge to expose them both, to ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. Using the evidence I had collected, I decided to hit Brian where it hurt the most, his family and his career. I started by sending an anonymous package to his wife. Inside, I included printouts of the text messages, photos of him and Emily together, and a detailed letter explaining the extent of their affair. I imagined the shock and devastation she would feel upon discovering the truth, but I felt no remorse. She deserved to know the kind of man she was married to. Next, I focused on his workplace. Brian was a respected librarian, well-liked by his colleagues and patrons. I crafted an anonymous email and sent it to his supervisor and several other key figures at the library, attaching all the damning evidence. I knew that the library had strict policies against fraternization, and I hoped this would result in serious repercussions for him. The fallout was swift. Brian's wife filed for divorce almost immediately, citing the overwhelming evidence of his infidelity. At work, he was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. I heard through the grapevine that he was facing severe disciplinary action, and his reputation was in tatters. Knowing that I had played a part in his downfall brought me a grim sense of satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. Emily needed to understand the gravity of her betrayal. I knew she would be staying with her parents temporarily, so I decided to pay her a visit. Armed with copies of the evidence, I drove to their house one evening. Her father answered the door, surprise evident on his face when he saw me. "David, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I need to speak to Emily," I said, my tone cold and unwavering. "It's important." He hesitated, but eventually led me to the living room where Emily was sitting. She looked up, her eyes widening in shock when she saw me. "David, what are you doing here?" She repeated her father's question, her voice trembling. Without a word, I handed her the folder containing all the evidence. "This is what you've done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've destroyed our marriage, and now you're going to face the consequences." She opened the folder, her face paling as she went through the contents. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was lonely, and Brian was there." "Spare me the excuses," I interrupted, my voice hard. You had a choice, Emily. You chose to betray me. Now everyone knows the truth. Her father, who had been watching the exchange in silence, finally spoke up. David, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out. I shook my head. There's nothing left to work out. Your daughter made sure of that. With that, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving Emily to face the devastation she had caused. As I drove away, a part of me felt a sense of closure, but another part knew that this was just the beginning. The path to healing would be long and arduous, but at least I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of my new life began to settle in. The house felt empty without Emily's presence, but it was a welcome emptiness. A peaceful silence replacing the tension and deceit that had once filled the air. I focused on my work, on rebuilding my life. But the pain of her betrayal was never far from my mind. One evening, as I was sorting through some old photographs, my phone rang. It was Emily. David, can we talk? She asked, her voice sounding fragile and uncertain. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. Okay, Emily, come over. When she arrived, she looked different. There was a weight on her shoulders, a sorrow in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had confronted her with the evidence of her affair. She glanced around, her eyes lingering on the empty spaces where her belongings used to be. David, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to explain, she began, her voice trembling. I need you to understand why I did what I did. I nodded, my emotions a mixture of anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of curiosity. Go ahead, Emily. Explain. She took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. I was lonely, David. You were always busy with work, and I felt invisible. Brian was there, he listened, he made me feel wanted. Do you think that justifies what you did? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You could have talked to me, told me how you felt. Instead, you chose to betray me. I know, she sobbed. I know I made a terrible mistake, but it wasn't just about the sex, it was about feeling alive, feeling noticed. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, I said flatly. You destroyed everything we had. She wiped her tears, her hands shaking. David, I'm so sorry. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm willing to do anything to make it right. I want to save our marriage. I shook my head, feeling a pang of regret mixed with resolve. Emily, it's too late for that. The trust is gone. There's no going back to how things were. She looked at me, desperation in her eyes. Please, David, give me another chance. We can go to counseling. We can rebuild. I still love you. Love? I scoffed. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Love isn't just words, Emily. It's actions. And your actions have shown me exactly where your priorities lie. For a moment, she was silent, her face a mask of sorrow. So, this is it then? There's no hope? I sighed, feeling the weight of the finality of my decision. I'm filing for divorce, Emily. It's the only way forward for both of us. You need to move on with your life, and I need to heal. She nodded slowly, the reality sinking in. I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. We sat in silence for a while, the enormity of our conversation hanging in the air. Finally, Emily stood up, wiping her eyes. I'll leave, David. I won't bother you again. I hope someday you can forgive me. I didn't respond, unable to find the words. As she walked out the door, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The chapter of my life with Emily was closing, but a new one was beginning. One where I could find peace and perhaps in time, happiness. The decision to divorce was painful, but necessary. It was time to let go of the past and focus on the future. I had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The divorce proceedings were grueling, marked by sharp exchanges and painful revelations. Emily fought hard, using every trick in the book to try and gain the upper hand. She painted herself as the victim, claiming that my neglect and focus on work had driven her into the arms of another man. But the evidence I had gathered was irrefutable, and my lawyer, Mr. Davis, was relentless in exposing the truth. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place, far removed from the warmth and comfort of home. As I sat across from Emily, I could hardly recognize the woman I had once loved. Her demeanor was defiant, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and desperation. It was clear she was determined to come out on top, no matter the cost. Our lawyers presented their cases, each side laying out the facts and arguments. Emily's lawyer tried to downplay the affair, suggesting it was a symptom of deeper issues in our marriage. Mr. Davis, however, was methodical in his approach, highlighting Emily's deceit and betrayal. He presented the evidence, texts, photos, videos, leaving no room for doubt about her infidelity. Emily's attempts to manipulate the situation became more apparent with each passing day. She tried to turn the court's sympathy towards her, claiming that she had been driven to the affair out of loneliness and neglect. But the judge saw through her facade. The cold, hard facts of her betrayal were impossible to ignore. The custody battle for the house was particularly contentious. Emily wanted to keep it, arguing that she had invested just as much into it as I had. But Mr. Davis pointed out that she had used our joint funds to maintain her affair, booking hotel rooms and buying gifts for Brian. The judge was firm in his decision, ruling that the house would be sold, with the proceeds divided equally. This was a blow to Emily, who had hoped to retain her place of refuge. As the trial progressed, the strain took its toll on both of us. Emily became increasingly erratic, her outbursts and accusations growing more desperate. She accused me of being controlling, of driving her to infidelity. But her claims fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence against her. The court saw her for what she was, a woman who had betrayed her husband and tried to justify her actions through lies and manipulation. Finally, the day came for the judge to deliver his verdict. The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. The judge began by acknowledging the pain and suffering caused by the affair, but he was unequivocal in his judgment. "It is clear that this marriage has been irretrievably broken," he stated, looking between Emily and me. "While both parties have contributed to the breakdown of the relationship, the actions taken by Mrs. Thompson have shown a blatant disregard for the sanctity of marriage. He granted the divorce on the grounds of infidelity and awarded me primary custody of our home. Emily would receive a fair share of our joint assets, but her attempts to gain sympathy and financial advantage had been thwarted. As the judge read his final decision, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. The battle was won, and I could finally begin to move forward. Leaving the courthouse that day, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness for what had been lost, but also a glimmer of hope for the future. Emily's betrayal had left deep scars, but the trial had given me a sense of closure. I could now focus on rebuilding my life, free from the shadow of her deceit. The weeks following the trial were a period of adjustment. I returned to the house one last time to gather my belongings, the empty rooms a stark reminder of the life I had once known. Emily had already moved out, leaving behind a mess of memories and broken dreams. I packed up what remained, each item a fragment of a past I was eager to leave behind. The sale of the house went smoothly, and with my share of the proceeds, I was able to secure a new place to live. It wasn't the dream home Emily and I had once shared, but it was mine, a fresh start. I spent my days settling into the new house, finding comfort in the routines and small victories of rebuilding my life. The divorce had been a painful chapter, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of a new journey, one where I could focus on my own happiness and growth. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. The trial had been a crucible, burning away the remnants of a broken marriage and leaving behind the possibility of a brighter future. The divorce was finalized, and the dust began to settle. The anger, the hurt, and the betrayal had left deep scars, but I was determined not to let them define me. Emily's departure from my life, though painful, opened a door to a new beginning. The house was sold, and I moved into a modest apartment closer to my work. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild and rediscover who I was outside of a broken marriage. The first few weeks were difficult. The quietness of my new home was both a comfort and a reminder of what I had lost. But as time passed, I found solace in the simplicity of my new life. I took up running, a hobby I had neglected for years. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, and the routine provided a structure that I desperately needed. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the years I was consumed by work and marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, and their support was invaluable. We spent weekends hiking, fishing, and just enjoying each other's company. Their presence reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I still had people who cared about me. One evening, I was invited to a barbecue at Mike's place. It was a casual gathering, just a few friends catching up over beers and grilled burgers. Among the guests was a woman named Lisa. She was Mike's cousin, recently moved to Oakwood from the city. She had a warm smile and a contagious laugh, and we hit it off immediately. We spent the evening talking, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine connection with someone. Lisa and I started seeing each other regularly. She was understanding and patient, aware of the emotional baggage I carried. We took things slow, allowing our relationship to develop naturally. Her kindness and positivity were a balm to my wounded heart. She had a way of making me see the brighter side of life, even when the shadows of the past loomed large. Reflecting on the journey I had been through, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal that once consumed me was now a distant memory, a chapter in my life that had taught me invaluable lessons. I learned the importance of self-worth and the necessity of setting boundaries. I understood that my happiness didn't depend on someone else's actions, but on my own choices and attitudes. I also came to appreciate the strength I had discovered within myself. The ordeal had tested me in ways I never imagined, but it also revealed a resilience I didn't know I possessed. I had faced the storm, weathered it, and emerged stronger on the other side. The experience had shaped me, but it didn't define me. As Lisa and I continued to build our relationship, I found myself looking forward to the future with a sense of hope and excitement. We talked about our dreams and aspirations, about the life we wanted to build together. It was a stark contrast to the uncertainty and pain of the past year. One sunny afternoon, as we sat on a bench overlooking a picturesque lake, Lisa turned to me and said, "David, I know you've been through a lot, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, now and always. We're in this together." Her words touched me deeply. I took her hand and replied, "Lisa, meeting you has been the best thing that happened to me in a long time. Thank you for being my rock, for showing me that there's still so much to look forward to." We sat there in comfortable silence, the warmth of the sun matching the warmth in my heart. I realized that my journey was far from over, but I was no longer walking it alone. With Lisa by my side and a newfound sense of purpose, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. Life after betrayal wasn't easy, but it was possible. It was about finding strength in the midst of adversity, about learning to let go of the past and embrace new beginnings. And as I looked into the horizon, I knew that my best days were still ahead of me. The road had been long and painful, but it had led me to a place of peace and hope, and for that, I was grateful.